blended does not mean better. Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and normally when I'm talking about working in the Pentagon, I'm kind of thinking about people who are, at the tail end of their military career. And that means I kind of assume that they're going to retire under the high 3 system. But folks have been entering the military under the blended retirement system since 2018, so it's probably time to crack out the bureaucrat's microscope and take a hard look at this. All right off the bat, let me say that word blended, it's a misnomer. There is nothing fundamentally blended about this system. Instead, it's better to think of the blended retirement system as consisting of 2 entirely separate programs. In fact, it's important to understand that all military compensation is really just an amalgamation of smaller, independent entitlements. That's true while you're in, and it's going to be true after you get out of the military. For example, while you're in, you get your base pay, your basic allowance for housing, your basic allowance for subsistence. Under certain conditions, you might get an overseas cost of living allowance or a family separation allowance or parachute pay or special assignment pay. The list just goes on. So it should come as no surprise that your retirement plan is bifurcated. In fact, I guess that's what you'd call it. It's more of the bifurcated retirement plan than the blended retirement plan. But that just means that we have to have 2 conversations. One about the defined contribution plan, that's the thrift savings plan, and one about the defined benefit plan, and that's the pension. Now, if you want to watch the official DoD videos about the blended retirement system, you can meet Robin.
Hi everyone, I'm Robin, and this is my little area here at the Office of Financial Readiness. I'm fictitious, but the work of financial readiness is real, and so are my answers regarding the new blended retirement system. We call it BRS. BRS, BRS, put our service to the test.
She is a pip and in no way an authentic representation of the folks working at the Office of Financial Readiness. Now, I'm just going to say this, I don't trust her.
People who are on the legacy retirement system want to know if they're going to lose their defined benefits if they switch to BRS. No sir and no ma'am, you will not lose your defined benefits if you switch from high 3 to BRS. However, the multiplier for the defined benefit is slightly lower with BRS.
I mean, are you going to lose your benefits? No, sir, no, ma'am. Just some of them. I don't know. Maybe she does have a future as bureaucrat. Anyways, a lot of the stuff that you're going to find on the blended retirement system wastes time comparing it to the high 3 system that it replaced. And that's because for a couple of years, service members were able to choose between these 2 systems. It doesn't exactly take a rocket scientist to see that for somebody who's going to retire with 20 years of service, the high 3 system is better. And so a lot of the compare and contrast was focused on soldiers who were earlier in their career and might not do 20 years. If they knew they weren't going to do 20 years, blended retirement system might be beneficial. But the fact of the matter is, most people, they're not very good judges of how long they're going to serve. And nowadays, none of that matters because you're either under one retirement system or the other, and there is no choice. All right, so let's talk about the thrift savings plan first. And you can think of this as your I ain't staying in the Army plan. It's got 2 obvious positive qualities, one issue that I think is kind of crappy, and then kind of a meh attribute that cushions the thing that bugs me. The first advantage of thrift savings plan is matching. In order to encourage you to contribute to your own retirement plan, the Department of Defense puts extra money into your thrift savings plan based on how much you put in. Even if you don't contribute anything, DoD puts in 1% of your base pay. And if you make contributions to thrift savings plan, DoD will match you up to 5%. That's about as close to free money as you're ever going to get, so I would recommend that you contribute 5% of your base pay to your thrift savings plan, really for 2 reasons. Number 1, I'm a fan of the book The Richest Man in Babylon, and a key theme in that book is simply to save 10% of what you earn. And if you contribute 5% to your thrift savings plan and DoD contributes the other 5, well, there you go. You got 10%. And number 2, if you don't really like being in the Army, it might give you some sadistic glee to know that you're taking money out of Uncle Sam's pocket and putting it in your own. The next advantage of the thrift savings plan is one that I don't think a lot of people really give much consideration, and that is that you can take a loan against your TSP. Now, just between you and me, I don't like the word loan for this particular financial arrangement, but the Department of Defense calls it a loan. Oh, and Robin, she doesn't even mention this feature. Here's why I don't like the word loan. In a normal loan, somebody else gives you money, and over time, you pay that money back to them. And in order to compensate them for lending you this money, you pay them interest. At the end of the payment period, you have whatever you bought with the money you borrowed. They have their money back, plus they've got a little bit of extra interest that they got from you. And whatever has transpired here, it gets documented in your credit rating. But in this TSP arrangement, you leverage your own assets. It has all the elements of a loan, but each of them is very different. Number 1, the somebody who's giving you money is you. Number 2, you do have to pay back the money, but you're paying it back into your thrift savings plan. And yes, there are some negative consequences if you don't pay it back, but those consequences are nowhere near as bad if you don't pay back somebody else that you borrowed the money from. Number 3, you have to pay interest, but you're paying that interest to yourself. While you have one of these loans, that chunk of money that you've borrowed from yourself, it's not invested in the market. And so the interest that you pay is really to make up for lost growth. It keeps you on track for retirement. And number 4, none of this goes to a credit agency. Good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't affect your credit rating. Oh, and now is probably a good time to tell you that I am not a certified financial advisor. If you're going to take advantage of these aspects of the thrift savings plan, it's probably a good idea to talk to a certified professional. That said, do you have a high interest loan? Leverage your TSP. Buying a car? Why would you take out an auto loan when you can just take a loan from your TSP? And no matter what you do not take an early withdrawal from TSP if you can take a loan instead. Early withdrawal comes with a huge penalty, and that doesn't provide you any advantage. All right, there is one thing about TSP that I don't like. It's not a deal killer, but it's important to understand. TSP is a retirement account. It's an investment that's intended to get you ready for your mid-60s. It's designed to take advantage of the long-run behavior of the markets and the lifelong changes in your earning. I mean, if you look at the earning of somebody who retires as a, lieutenant colonel or a master sergeant, if you look at all the money they're going to earn over their 20 years of service, you'll see that about a third of it is earned in the last few years. And sure, over the long run, the stock market generally goes up, but in the short run, it can be a bumpy ride. And I have this sneaking suspicion that eventually there's going to be a cohort of retirees who see their retirement savings suddenly shrink just as they're getting ready to retire from the military. I suspect that that group of people is going to feel cheated because in their minds, their TSP was intended to help them after they transitioned out of the military. But the reality is that the TSP is really designed to help them when they get into their 60s. Now, there is a consolation prize of sorts for this situation. You've got some options about what you can do with your thrift savings plan when you leave the military. You can just leave the money in thrift savings plan, or you can transfer it to an employer's 401k or into an IRA. But unless you're willing to pay a penalty for early withdrawal, and it's a big penalty. You have to leave the money in a retirement account. And if you want to understand more about this, watch this video and I'll put a link in the description. Okay, so that is really the first half of the blended retirement system. And now let's talk about the pension. I have done a lot of videos on pensions, and the important thing to understand is that there are 5 factors that influence the size of your pension. There's 3 factors that establish the initial size of your pension: your years of service, a multiplier, and the average of your highest 36 months of base pay. Then there's a partial cost of living adjustment in the year you retire, and every year after that you get an annual cost of living adjustment. And of course, the big difference between the pension with the blended retirement system and the old high 3 system is that multiplier is 2% instead of 2.5%. And I'm just going to jump to the punchline here. That 2% is probably not enough to encourage people to serve beyond 20 years. This is a little bit tricky to explain, and if you've got a better way to talk about it, I would love to hear. You see, putting a value on a pension that grows with inflation it's a little bit tricky because the normal way of calculating net present value requires that you have a discount rate, and that just doesn't apply here. And so I like to think about this pension in terms of total lifelong earnings. Let's say you've got a pension of $5,000 a month, so that's $60,000 a year. If you live for 10 years after retirement, then you get a total of $600,000. And if you live for 20 years, you get $1.2 million. So if the focus is maximizing the total amount of financial benefit that you get from your pension, then the factor that matters is how many years you're going to live after you transition out of military service. And since the timing of your military retirement probably isn't going to change when you're going to die, you're just trading years of service for years of retirement. Now, back to that 2% multiplier. If you serve 1 extra year, your pension goes up by 2%. But the number of years that you're going to be receiving that pension goes down by 1 year. So, assuming that you have maxed out your high 36 months of base pay, you would have to live 51 years after you retired in order for that additional year of service to generate more money for you. I just don't think that's going to hold people in the service. Now, a lot of people assume that the real purpose of the blended retirement system was to save money for the government, reduce the amount of funds that they had to pay. But even when this plan was first being talked about, there were concerns that in fact it was going to cost the services more. Back in 2014, before the blended retirement system was in effect, the Department of Defense planned to spend $16.8 billion in retired pay. In 2024, they asked for $21.7 billion for both retired pay and the thrift savings plan. That basically tracks with the Consumer Price Index. So it doesn't look to me like there were any cost savings. And I know, there's going to be people who watch this video and wonder why I didn't talk more about the continuation pay incentive. Honestly, I don't think it's going to matter as much as that accidental incentive that encourages people to retire exactly at 20 years. In fact, if anything, I would expect that by 2038, when the first folks under the blended retirement system start retiring, that at least in the Army, we would see a slight shift in the timing for the Colonel Promotion Board. Today, it's about 22 years. So there's lots of retirement eligible people who are willing to wait around 1 or 2 extra years to see how they do on the board. In 2038, I think fewer people will hang around. And I think at least the Army will shift the Colonel Board just a little bit to maintain a competitive pool of applicants. And look, if you're under the blended retirement system, you might be starting to think about what does it really take to make Colonel? Well, I argue that it is a clear set of skills. And if you want to see what they are, watch this video.